And as attorneys for former President Trump presented their defense today, Louisiana Senator Bill Cassidy is defending his recent vote on the constitutionality of the impeachment trial.
He's facing a backlash from the state GOP. In tonight's In Focus, Tantron looks at how many state Republicans are doubling down on the former president.
In a brief Twitter video this week, Louisiana Republican Senator Bill Cassidy covered a lot of ground.
That there are those who think that I should put President Trump above the Constitution. That's not conservatism. That is not republicanism, and I reject it.
As the second impeachment trial of former President Trump continued, many Louisiana Republicans are focused on Cassidy's earlier vote. He's among only 6 Republican senators who voted the proceeding is constitutional. This video seems to address his critics.
Now, before you disagree, I ask you to go on C-SPAN and listen to the argument yourself and come to your own conclusion.
The conclusion from the Republican Party in East Baton Rouge, Cassidy's home parish, is to censure him, which, according to its post on Facebook, is unprecedented. The party called him, quote, an object of shame.
In voting in favor to allow them to move forward, I don't think that's upholding your duty. I think that he made a mistake.
Donald Villery is the Republican National Committee man from Louisiana.
Some say that Cassidy is behaving as a statesman, as he should, as a senator. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, my thoughts are that's probably mostly Democrats. I guess there's a few Republicans, especially the never-Trumpers, that would say that.
Congressional Democrats maintain the impeachment is about holding the president accountable for inciting the insurrection at the Capitol. UNO political scientist Ed Shervanek says this trial will likely increase support for Mr. Trump among Louisiana Republicans.
The number of registered Republicans is up by 100,000 in the last 2 years, and that's just a continuing trend.
Will the backlash against Cassidy be a continuing trend? That may depend on how he ultimately votes on the question of whether or not Donald Trump should be convicted. Tan Trung, Eyewitness News.
While the Louisiana GOP has criticized Senator Cassidy, it did praise fellow Louisiana Republican Senator John Kennedy for his recent vote against the constitutionality of the impeachment trial.